On my nightstand next to my bed is a copy of this book, Paradise Lost by John Milton. And when I'm suffering from some insomnia and I can't sleep, reading this book I find has a sort of calming effect. I sung of chaos and eternal night, taught by the heavenly muse to venture down the dark descent, and up to reascend, though hard and rare, thee I revisit safe, and thee thy sovereign vital lamp, but thou revisitest not these eyes that roll in vain to find thy piercing ray, and find no dawn. Moby Dick is another book that has a reputation for being one of the greatest books in literature, certainly one of the greatest books of American literature, but also a really tough book to read. It's a really big book, so reading it is a big investment of time. And it's notoriously dense and wandering. It doesn't have much of a driving plot. The book is about whaling. It's about a Captain Ahab who's hunting for a white whale that he wants to kill, named Moby Dick. And that's pretty much it. And so it makes you wonder what's the deal with a book that is so big but is about something so sort of focused and simple in a way. For me personally, my experience of reading Moby Dick is not so different from my experience of reading Paradise Lost. The language in both cases is unbelievable. It's otherworldly. And in that language, there's a tremendous amount of power. There's this capacity for communicating things which we don't often hear expressed. Paradise Lost is about God. It's about the creation of the world. It's about the first human beings on earth. It's about sin. And the language matches those themes. Moby Dick is a large book about something relatively mundane, about this fishing voyage, this whaling voyage. But our narrator, Ishmael, and obviously the book's author, Herman Melville, have infused this narrative with the same kind of otherworldly significance and otherworldly power that you would see in Paradise Lost, for example. For me, Moby Dick is like you take the mind of someone like John Milton with the language and the insight and the brilliance of a John Milton, and you say, you have to write the epic poem of the mundane, of the day-to-day. My favorite chapter in Moby Dick is chapter 23. It's a very short chapter. I think it's just 13 sentences, and it really captures a lot of what's going on stylistically and thematically in Moby Dick. And I think it's a good indicator of what this book is really all about. To set the scene, Ishmael, our narrator, is about to get on board the Pequod. It's the name of the ship where he's going to set sail on this whaling voyage. And basically all that happens in this scene is he sees someone. He sees this character named Bulkington. And he recognizes him because he, not long ago, in a previous scene, he saw Bulkington get off a different ship from a different whaling voyage. And he was greeted in some inn. And so he knows who Bulkington is. And that's it. That's the event of this chapter. That's the narrative of this chapter. But like everything in Moby Dick, Ishmael, our narrator, and Melville, our author, insists on seeing otherworldly significance in this event. He insists on finding the metaphysical, the psychological, the existential implications of this character Bulkington. And he explores it, and he basically is going to write the epic poem of Bulkington. Some chapters back, one Bulkington was spoken of, a tall, new-landed mariner encountered in New Bedford at the inn, when, on that shivering winter's night, the Pequod thrust her vindictive bows into the cold, malicious waves. Who should I see standing at her helm but Bulkington? When I talk about the language and the importance of language, um, sort of the audacity of Ishmael's language here, these powerful adjectives, the shivering winter night, the Pequod's vindictive bows, the cold, malicious waves. He continues, I looked with sympathetic awe and fearfulness upon the man who in midwinter just landed from a 4 years' dangerous voyage could so unrestingly push off again for still another tempestuous term. The land seemed scorching to his feet. And so now, like, Ishmael breaks off in this like reflective philosopher's voice. He's reflecting on the fact that Bulkington just landed and he's going back out to sea again. I invite you to pay attention to this language, which is so, for me, otherworldly. It's so unique and so compelling. Wonderfullest things are ever the unmentionable. Deep memories yield no epitaphs. This 6-inch chapter is the stoneless grave of Bulkington. Ishmael is talking to us now. He's telling us that this 6-inch chapter in the book that we're reading, meaning the short chapter, this chapter 23, is the stoneless grave of Bulkington, meaning this is the last we're going to hear of him. There's no more Bulkington after this. It's so meta. He's like jumping off the page and addressing us and referencing the literal text that we have in front of us and the size of the text on the page. Let me only say that it fared with him as with the storm-tossed ship that miserably drives along the leeward land. Ishmael is obsessed with metaphors and analogies. So we're told here that the fate of Bulkington is like the fate of a ship that drives upon the land, that skids upon rocks. Ishmael insists on reading metaphors into everything and reading analogies into everything. And in doing so, at least for me personally, he invites me to do the same in my own life, to see the metaphysical, the spiritual significance in the mundane, to find metaphors in the mundane. The port would fain give succor. The port is pitiful. In the port is safety, comfort, hearthstone, supper, warm blankets, friends, all that's kind to our mortalities. But in that gale, the port, the land, is the ship's direst jeopardy. She must fly all hospitality. One touch of land, though it but graze the keel, would make her shudder through and through. With all her might, she crowds all sail offshore. In so doing, fights against the very winds that fain would blow her homeward, seeks all the lashed sea's landlessness again, for refuge's sake, forlornly rushing into peril, her only friend, her bitterest foe. So, what Ishmael is talking about is how, in certain circumstances, what we associate with safety, the safety of land, the safety of port, and of friends, and of home, all these things are so unsafe to a ship, which has to use all its strength to resist hitting the land. And so, the same is true for Bulkington, who finds his safety, his spiritual kind of redemption, his purpose, his life in the sea. This next section is so shocking to me and so incredible. Ishmael, our narrator, he's an extremely versatile narrator. We know that from the first sentence of the book. The famous first sentence of Moby Dick is, "Call me Ishmael." He's basically addressing us, the reader. He's a narrator who's so larger than life, who's jumps off the page in that first sentence, "Call me Ishmael." And what he's going to do now is so mind-boggling. He addresses Bulkington. He talks to this character Bulkington in his epic poet's voice, as if he's like this poet of his universe. It's so audacious, it's so poetic and unbelievable. Know ye now, Bulkington? Glimpses do ye seem to see of that mortally intolerable truth, that all deep earnest thinking is but the intrepid effort of the soul to keep the open independence of her sea, while the wildest winds of heaven and earth conspire to cast her on the treacherous, slavish shore? After addressing Bulkington in this way, we now go into some philosophy. But as in landlessness alone resides highest truth, shoreless, indefinite as God, so better it is to perish in that howling infinite than be ingloriously dashed upon the lee, even if that were safety. For worm-like then, oh, who would crave and crawl to land, terrors of the terrible? Is all this agony so vain? He's saying that it's better to be destroyed at sea in the, quote, howling infinite than to perish on land. In the final sentences, again, we're addressing Bulkington, and I think when I read it, I hear him addressing me. And when I need words of encouragement, when I need to find courage, I think of these words. Take heart, O Bulkington. Bear thee grimly, demigod. Up from the spray of thy ocean perishing, straight up leaps thy apotheosis. And the point here, in short, is that to achieve greatness, it takes risk and it takes courage. And so, take heart.